Testing 1, 2, 3.
Hello, I'm Mahesh Saptharishi, the host of Mic Drop, a podcast where we explore what makes innovators tick. There is no template that guarantees innovation, yet there are some patterns. Without tenacity, you will likely give up too soon. Without being inspired, and without the ability to inspire others, you won't have the strength of a community. Without being creative, you'll not be able to break from the status quo. Without being knowledgeable, you'll not be able to identify consequential problems. Innovators, almost without exception, are tenacious, inspiring, creative, and knowledgeable. This is what makes innovators tick, leading to that mic drop moment. The purpose of this podcast is to learn and make that mic drop moment more likely for each of us. Thank you and enjoy.
A Nemo goldfish memory, or Dory. That's right. I can't even remember that. That's just set on my memory because I can't even remember my own nicknames when they call me Dory.
Everybody, welcome to this episode of Mic Drop. I'm very happy to have Chris Bennett join us. Chris is the founder and the chief product officer of Callyo. He's a self-described product addict. He's currently the director of product management for Callyo and the Cape Solutions. You also, as a 7-year-old, invented a dream machine as a self-therapy capability. And supposedly your parents believed in your dream machine.
That one's still somehow on the memory banks back there. But I don't remember, so I'm told, right? So that's why I always have to adjust the language here. I'm told I was having trouble sleeping and had a lot of nightmares as a child, which I guess to be true. And to try to solve my way out of that, I remembered tinkering with a lot of electronics and gadgets in my dad's basement. And I opened a drawer and there were all these light switches and dimmer switches and dials and all that. And I got a shoebox and I created what I called the dream machine, which is basically a bunch of taped and screwed on light switches onto a shoebox with a coiled telephone cord, if you can picture it, from the shoebox attached to my wood bed frame. And before I'd go to bed each night, I would turn the dials or the switches and I would say, oh, hey, I want to dream about, I don't know, probably at that time it was G.I. Joe or whatever the heck it was, and not about monsters or something. And I'd convince myself that these switches and these dials were doing things. And then I'd go to bed, and that mental conditioning, I guess, or the psychology of setting these dials before I went to bed, it helped get rid of my nightmares. And that, to me, when I think I could see I'm creating something and it has a result, that must have had some formative impact on the desire to keep creating more and more things.
Wasn't there some interesting paper in neuroscience maybe a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, where there's this, for people who have, let's say, their hand amputated, and at some point the brain thinks that the arm still exists and they feel like they're clasping that palm that doesn't exist anymore, that the hand's amputated. And that causes a great degree of pain and discomfort and such. And there was a neuroscientist who came up with this box with a mirror where you could put your good arm and your amputated part of the limb into this box. But what you saw on one side where the amputated limb existed was actually a mirror. And so he would ask you then to clasp both hands and then unclasp, and visually you would see in the mirror that both your hands were unclasping, and that act of seeing you unclasp now released you in this phantom limb that didn't exist. So I think you kind of stumbled upon that great neuroscience epiphany as a 7-year-old. So kudos to you.
That's totally what I was trying to do back there, I'm sure.
So I think there are a lot of people at Motorola who don't know what Callyo does and what the 1021 products, etc., are. So wanted you to kind of give us an overview of what Callyo is all about.
We founded Callyo in 2009 to help internet crime against children, or ICAC, investigators better collect and capture digital evidence in the course of those investigations. If you think about the communications that we have on a daily basis Motorola obviously specializes in radio, 911 calls, et cetera. But we don't often think about the phone. We're making phone calls, we're sending text messages, we're sending picture messages. And those same kind of calls and messages that we make in our personal or business lives are also made in the course of these investigations. So really thinking about Callyo at the heart of it is, how do we help the investigator capture that digital phone call recording, that text message copy that ultimately can be used in trial for prosecution and make the community safer.
Very cool. There's a lot of very interesting and exciting history behind how you started Callyo, and probably one of the first things that struck me when I heard you speak at the Motorola Innovators Conference earlier this year was how you solicited some feedback initially on whether the notion of Callyo was an interesting one. This is the whole write a whole bunch of letters
Right.
concept. Maybe go into that a little bit.
Yes. So hacking away on my computer as a teenager, my dad would always cut out an article from the Philadelphia Inquirer tech section. I believe it came out on Wednesdays. He would just leave these articles on my desk cut out just as a, hey, I know you're a teenager and you're not going to read the whole paper, but if you read one thing, pay attention to this one. And then he would say, hey, if any of those really interest you, reach out to the people, like write them a letter. Especially when you're young, when you're a teenager. Imagine, Mahesh, if you get a letter from a teenager, you're more likely to read that and take an interest and say, wow, that's interesting than somebody now my age if I reached out to you cold, right? But that same idea and that same act of reaching out, getting a response, and just connecting with somebody is what inspired me later to say, when I have this idea for Callyo, I think law enforcement could benefit from this. I think it's interesting. I really don't know. You can't just knock on the door of a police station and say, hey, I've got an idea, kind of look at you funny at the front door. But I wrote letters to about 40 of the 67 counties in Florida, of the different sheriff's offices, saying, hey, my understanding is that this is how you are buying prepaid mobile disposable phones for your operations now. I think you could virtualize these phones and save on equipment and money and get better evidence collection, but I'm not an expert. Can we talk about it? And of all those 40 plus letters, 2 responded. One of them, I believe, around the Jacksonville area said, thank you for your letter, but not interested at this time. But then it only took one sheriff, and it was Sheriff Grady Judd out of Polk County, Florida, who took a leap and said, you know what, maybe there's something to this. So he took one of his detectives, gave him the letter and said, hey, go meet with this guy. But at the same time, why is somebody randomly reaching out to us saying that they think they have a better way to record our investigations? Turned out later they met me at an offsite location and really did some background checks and found out. And it was a perfect match, though, because especially when you deal with computer crimes and internet crimes, these are your geeks of the police department that get the technology, they know what's missing, and they want something better. And here it was myself, Ilya Orlik, who is our founding engineer, and we said, you know what, I think we can work together and actually make a better tool for the department. So it all came from that letter, and that sparked that first meeting, which created our first application.
Now, how many of those 40 agencies that you sent a letter to are now Callyo customers?
Oh, well, all of them. I mean, I think all 67 counties are probably. My sales rep maybe can correct me on that, Dave. And really, in addition to Ilya, who started by coding it, Dave Reedus was a former Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office undercover narcotics detective. And he was the first real subject matter expert, if you will, to bring on to say, like, hey, it's great that this sheriff's office met with us once, but we need this kind of information and this feedback on a daily basis. And we need somebody to go out there and evangelize it. And he and I went to 2 different trade shows. I remember the first week we had the product out, we were calling each other, hey, I got this county interested, I got that county interested. And we were just off to the races. So myself, Ilya, and Dave, when we got started that first month, really got things cranking.
That's very cool. So you started this process in a truly agile way. You had an idea, you had a concept, and the first thing you did was you sourced a potential customer. You sourced a potential development partner who could give you, from a user standpoint, genuine feedback on how the product would work. So explain the process after that. So now you have Polk County. You've built a little prototype, a little solution for them. Where did it go after that?
Yeah, so part of why we had such a great initial launch and trajectory is when we provided Polk County with that virtual investigation phone for that operation, they arrested 50 child predators in a 2-week proactive sting. And they usually have high numbers, but that was a lot, right? And that would have involved at least 50 hardware mobile phones that they would have had to purchase to accomplish the same thing. They told me later they weren't sure the technology was going to work, so they actually bought like a whole box of backup phones that they never used. Like, oh, thanks guys for all your trust and confidence. But it did work perfectly. They got a bunch of arrests out of it. And then between Polk County and the other agencies that were part of that task force operation that used it, when they came back and they said, oh my God, that was fantastic, it's always, but could it also do this, right? And I think that we're used to, as product managers and creators, knowing things that customers are asking for, but it is definitely harder when you're at a middle stage or late stage of product development to say, okay, of the 10, 20, 30 things that people want, how do I really know what the next piece of low-hanging fruit is that I should go develop? I think in those early days, it's a combination of customer feedback and a strong intuition. Customer asks for it. You know that feature capability absolutely needs to exist. You agree with it. You build it. You get it out there in the simplest, straightforward way as possible, individual features at a time. They take advantage and use it, and that just keeps growing that love affair between you and the customer.
Thanks for helping me get my presentation ready.
You really pulled through on that last project. Well done.
Thank you so much for helping get things done on short notice.
I really appreciate you.
Great job as always.
When you want to thank a coworker for going above and beyond, don't just send them a chat. Take an extra moment to send them a virtual high five. The Motorola Solutions High Five program sends a message of thanks to the employee and lets their manager know of what a great team player they are. Even better, every 5th high five translates into a cash reward. The best way to show appreciation is with a high five. Send one today.
So now you have a capability that you have real users that love it. And now you're trying to scale it, and not just scale it from a go-to-market standpoint. You're trying to scale it just also from figuring out what the next thing is. And your approach to developing that product roadmap, I find super fascinating. And obviously there's no universal template to do this, right? But maybe Chris, just go into that approach that you typically use in your ventures.
Yeah, so it's a lot of quantity in order to identify the quality. It's the way I look at it. You can't overly focus on one idea that you are convinced is the quality idea, the best idea, the thing that's going to change the world and customers are going to buy, because you just don't know. Even if you have the right idea, your execution of it might not be right. If your execution might be perfect, you might not be solving the customer's real problem. If you're solving a customer's problem, is it enough of a problem where they're A, willing to learn how to use your solution, and then B, willing to pay for it, right? So when I think about it, I use the framework of, am I building a painkiller or a vitamin? If you think of it that way, vitamins are great. We should take them. We know that if I take this daily multivitamin on my desk every day, I should feel better over time. But if I woke up with a headache this morning, I'm more focused and concerned that, hey, taking 2 Advil is going to help take away that pain, and I'd be willing to pay $1 for that more than my daily multivitamin, right? So when we look at what to build next, it's about finding where the customer struggles, where they're having pain, how they're solving the problem right now, and then is there a way to make that a little bit easier? Not so much solve it differently, but just can I make it a little bit easier, less painful for them to get through that part?
So I actually really like this whole painkillers versus vitamins idea. Now, do you think that this is more of a public safety phenomenon where there's lots of resistance to change processes? Or do you think that this is a bit more of this is human behavior to a certain extent that you're hacking in the process as well?
Oh, it is absolutely with any product, right? It's when you're buying the next gadget, the next thing for your home or your kitchen or your entertainment system. Yes, we do buy some things that are fun because we think, oh, hey, that is cool. But if something, a key appliance or a key thing in your home is broken, and that is painful, if you're used to using the microwave, like it breaks, and like, oh my God, that is painful. I need something new. But hey, maybe I could get away with not having an espresso machine for a day, but my coffee maker is really important, right? So you look at all these same decisions when you're building consumer products as you would a public safety one. And a lot of that unfortunately translated to mobile phones, and it was just, hey, you can't use your personal phones for work business. So officers were issued these either old phones or not smartphones. Meanwhile, they're carrying these supercomputers in their personal lives. And we had to find a way to break down that barrier between creating a valuable enough tool, but making it so that they could use it and grow a love affair with it, really before the chief found out.
How many hours of audio do you think either get recorded, or at least from a utilization standpoint? And I'm trying to get a magnitude of the data that is really evidentiary in this case. How much of that flows through the Callyo system today?
Yeah, so when we did some analysis on digital evidence collection a number of years ago, when we were looking to scale the company, we found that outside of body camera video, really the largest source of digital evidence that was captured for criminal investigations was with Callyo. Because if you think about it, what are the two devices you're using to collect information on a daily basis? You've either got your body camera, which is obviously capturing most everything around you, but then you've got your phone. You're making phone calls, you're sending messages. If you watch a crime drama, to go through any one of these random Netflix specials that come out, what is the content of those specials, right? When you're watching Tiger King, it's those crazy phone calls from Joe in prison that become that content, that is that information. We've got command central evidence, we've got records, we've got things like that, where we know how big and complex those tools need to be in order to be competitive. We never saw ourselves as the one to collect and be that DEM system. We just said we want to be the absolute best front-end collection tool, keep that focus narrow. And because we did that, we just have such a large breadth of collection that's going on now. But one thing I want to emphasize, because especially to people that are new to Callyo, is we only focus in the area of what's called one-party consent collection of digital evidence. We do not do anything akin to wiretapping, eavesdropping, anything where both parties would not be aware. And in fact, I think that we really focus and care about building authenticity and trust and improving fairness in investigations by making sure that everything gets captured and nothing can be modified or tampered with. Because think about it, if you're a defendant, do you want only the calls or only the messages that were decided to be recorded, or do you want to know literally this is everything that happened as is, and then you take that information and you analyze it from there?
That's such a good point. I mean, this notion of trust and privacy is just incredibly important from any sort of data collection and analysis standpoint. But I think one of the things, by the way, that, and it's a simple point, but one of the things that I don't think the majority of Motorolans realize is that when we have this concept of evidence and when we have this concept of command central evidence, really the predominant data type that we think goes into command central evidence is body-worn camera and in-car video, really video. And really it's the mid-response data that is collected. What you're talking about is effectively next to that video, the biggest trove of data that is used for prosecution purposes and investigative purposes, etc. And that is now something that post-acquisition here, you're actively integrating today with command central evidence.
Yeah, I mean, audio is fascinating. If you think about it, we're on an audio podcast right now, right? Sometimes video is too much information, and it's all about the right information at the right time, and then how you can analyze, how you can view it, how you can transcribe it. Some of our most popular features over time were simple things like just splitting the audio channels where you've got one speaker and another.
Very cool. So maybe like if I take a step back, and I'm going to bounce around through the timeline of your life at this point. So you got a master's in education technology from Harvard, and you got a bachelor's in management from Wharton. How did that influence your thinking?
Going to those schools, how it really influenced my thinking was more of surrounding myself by excellent people, because when you're in a good program, you're typically surrounded by other folks that have worked hard and are really in it. And seeing when you achieve a class project even together, when you're working on a project with a bunch of people that not only have the intelligence, but that enthusiasm and that work ethic to get it done, and you see what the outcome can be, it really doesn't matter so much about the school name or the professors. I mean, I'm sure all that was important if I could remember any of it, but it's really about seeing what you can achieve when you surround yourself with excellent people. And I think that what I found outside of that education experience is there's opportunities every day in life to surround yourself with excellent people. And the more time that we spend being thoughtful in how we build our teams and being picky about choosing excellent people, but also when there are people that are not excellent, not including them on your team or rotating that team or changing it out, that's what goes the furthest. So if I had to pull one lesson away from those experiences, it would be that.
And I'm so glad, I think you said that. I think we sometimes as society put too much emphasis on which school did you go to? Is it an Ivy League school or whatever? It is the experience that you get regardless of where you go to and how you learn from that experience that tends to matter the most. And I think you have taken that to heart in many different ways. I mean, one of the things that I find incredibly fascinating every time I talk to you is you pull out these names of people that you regularly have conversations with or have connected with. And like, how did Chris ever meet that individual? And you do it in such a humble and simple way. Your latest example is your light phone example. Maybe start with that first.
Yeah, so I think as many of us are, we're probably listening to this on a smart device now, we're all a little bit or a little too much addicted to our mobile devices. And I've been trying to do a better job separating that work being on your phone device addiction to, hey, I checked a text message, now let me go look at my email or Reddit or something like that, right? So I was listening to what's my favorite podcast, How I Built This with Guy Raz, and was listening to an episode about the light phone, which is, as it kind of sounds, it's a phone that makes a call and sends a text message. And it's less about the technology and more about, can you find times in your life to disconnect and still have that little bit of comfort that if there's an emergency, I have a phone, but it doesn't have social media on it, right? And listening to the podcast, I hear the founders speak, and I did order one, but regardless, I hop online, I find them on LinkedIn, I message them, I post that I just heard this podcast with these founders, and then they respond. They said, that's great, we're so excited, and let us know how you think about going late. And I think it's just that extra bit of follow-up where if you find something or someone that interests you, maybe they don't respond, it doesn't matter, but less people than you would think actually reach out to them and say, hey, I heard that podcast or tried that product and I loved it. And those same people will build a network where now if you post something or need help or they change, they're forming a new company, a new job, those intersections will happen again later in life. And it's about just not being afraid to do it. And I mentioned this to a lot of people at Motorola on GChat in different spaces. How do you want to get more recognition outside of your immediate manager or team? Participate and contribute in discussions that are going on in the competitive intel channel, or participate in a hackathon and bring a great solution. Or if you know that, Mahesh, that you're really into something new in AI, I don't think you would ever be upset if a Motorola reached out to you and said, I've been thinking about this idea, or I listened to you on this podcast and would like to talk about it some more, because we love talking about what we're building and what our interests are. So no one's ever going to turn down a message if it's aligned with their interests.
That is so simply and eloquently put. Yeah, it's something that I find really impressive about how you do it. Now tell me, how has that community helped you over the past few years?
Yeah, so the community was incredibly helpful in acquiring talent, partners, different technologies that we built Callyo atop of. But I have to give a lot of credit where it's due to Steve Ressler, who was the president of Callyo. He and I were friends, and it's a little bit bizarre because I think this is an interesting part of the story. We both moved from Philadelphia to Florida the same year. We both met our partners the same year. We're both, I think, about the same height and the same weight. And we lived about 10 miles apart. And we were both working on GovTech companies. He's working on one called GovLoop. I'm working on one called GovLive, right? So again, the number of similarities at this point were just ridiculous. And a mutual friend of ours, Nathan Schweigler, said, I think you two should meet. Like, there's something that just seems a little similar about your timelines and interests. So I met Steve, and he's honestly one of the best entrepreneurs, especially in the area of GovTech, and knowing what it takes to scale a business. And unlike me, who's got a Nemo goldfish memory, or Dory, that's sorry. I can't even remember that. That's just set on my memory because I can't even remember my own nicknames when they call me Dory. He meets everyone. He knows everyone. He understands the value of building that network. And a lot of his outreach translated and worked its way into me. And I adopted that. And ultimately, that's when we joined Motorola. It's not because all of a sudden I popped my head up one day and said, hey, I'm thinking of growing or scaling this company. It's because he had spent those years working with us when he joined Callyo, building that network within public safety so that everyone did know who we were.
Hey, Mic Drop listeners. You have just heard part 1 of our conversation with Chris Bennett, founder and chief product officer at Callyo. I hope you were as captivated by the conversation as I was. In 2 weeks, we will release part 2 of this episode, where we will continue exploring Chris's entrepreneurship journey and his thoughts on what makes for a good team culture. Till then, goodbye. Thank you for listening to Mic Drop. We would love to hear your thoughts on our podcast and your ideas for future episodes. Send us a note at micdrop@motorolasolutions.com. We promise to maybe read all your emails. And with that, I'm out.